You probably won't believe what I'm about to tell you. I didn't believe it either, not at first. I was standing across the road from the Wellington Barracks on a gray Tuesday morning in March, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hand, and I watched a boy become a statue. That's the only way I can describe it. I watched a boy become a statue, and the man who did it to him was standing 6 inches from his face, screaming words I couldn't even make out from where I stood. I'm a photographer, freelance. I do weddings mostly, christenings, the occasional corporate thing. But once a month or so, I take my old Nikon out to St. James's Park, and I shoot the changing of the guard. Not for money, just because I like it. There's something about the discipline of those young men in their red tunics and bearskin caps that I find calming, you know. In a city this loud, this messy, this rude, you can stand on the pavement and watch a piece of England that hasn't changed in 200 years. It steadies me. That's how I met Sergeant Major Pell. Well, met is a strong word. I never spoke to him directly until much later, but I knew him by sight the way you know certain men in any city. He was the one who shouted. Even among drill sergeants who shout for a living, he was the one whose voice carried over birdcage walk like a rifle crack. The boy's name, I would find out later, was Thomas Ainsworth. He was 19 years old. He came from a village in County Durham that I'd never heard of and probably couldn't find on a map. His father had been a coal miner before the pits closed. His mother worked in a Tesco. He had a younger sister with cerebral palsy who he used to push to school in her chair. None of this I knew on that gray Tuesday in March. All I knew was that he was the thinnest, palest, most frightened-looking recruit I had ever seen standing in a line of foot guards. And he was shaking. You're not supposed to shake. That's the whole point. You stand at attention, you don't move, you don't look, you don't speak, you don't even blink if you can help it. The bearskin sits on your head like a black sun, and you hold the rifle and you become a piece of the building behind you. That's the job. That's the only job. But this boy was shaking. Not violently, just a tremor in his left hand where it gripped the rifle, a tremor at his jaw. I saw it through the long lens of my camera, and I lowered the camera and I looked at him with my own eyes, and yes, he was definitely shaking. Sergeant Major Pell saw it too. Now here's the thing about Pell. He wasn't a tall man, maybe 5'9", maybe 10. He had a face like a clenched fist, all angles and lines, with gray eyes that didn't seem to belong to a living person. They were the eyes of a man who had stopped finding the world surprising a long time ago. He wore his uniform like it had grown out of his skin. And when he walked towards a recruit, the recruit aged 5 years in 3 steps. He walked towards Ainsworth. I was still standing across the road, behind the railings, with my cold coffee, and I watched. He didn't shout at first. That was the strange thing. He just stood in front of the boy and looked at him, not at his face, at his hand, at the tremor. He looked at the tremor for what must have been 30 seconds without saying a word. And in those 30 seconds I watched Thomas Ainsworth try to stop his own hand from moving and fail. Then Pell leaned in. He didn't shout, he spoke, but he spoke in a voice that was somehow louder than a shout would have been. A low, flat, terrifying voice that I could hear across 4 lanes of London traffic. Are you crying, son? The boy didn't answer. You're not allowed to answer, not on parade. Are you crying on the Queen's parade ground? The Queen had been dead for 2 years by then, but old habits die hard in places like this. Everyone still said the Queen's colors, the Queen's regiment, the Queen's parade. I suppose it'll be another generation before they say the King's without thinking about it. The boy still didn't answer, but I saw, through my lens, a single tear come out of his right eye and slide down the side of his nose and disappear into the strap of the bearskin under his chin. I thought Pell was going to destroy him. I genuinely thought in that moment that I was about to watch a 19-year-old boy from a coal village have his soul taken out of his body by a man with gray eyes in a London courtyard. I almost looked away. I'm ashamed to say that. I almost looked away because I didn't want to photograph it. But Pell didn't destroy him. What Pell did was something I have thought about every single day since. He took one step back, just one. He squared his own shoulders, and then he said in that same low, flat voice, but somehow now with a different shape to it, a shape I couldn't quite name. "You are standing where the bravest men in this country have stood. You don't have to be brave yet. You just have to stand." That was all he said. Then he turned and walked away. The boy kept shaking, but he kept standing. I went home that afternoon and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I made my wife a cup of tea, and she asked me what was wrong, and I said nothing was wrong. And she gave me that look she gives me when she knows I'm lying, but she's decided to let me lie. I sat on the sofa with the cold coffee still in my hand, hours later, and I thought about that boy and that man and that one sentence. You don't have to be brave yet. You just have to stand. I'm 47 years old. I've been to 2 funerals this year already. My mother's in January and a friend from school in February, cancer, very fast, no warning. I've been struggling. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't. There's a heaviness in my chest most mornings that I can't quite explain to my GP, and I've been taking the long way to most places because I don't like running into people who knew my mum and want to talk about her. You don't have to be brave yet. You just have to stand. I went back to the barracks the next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. It became a kind of pilgrimage. Don't laugh. I know how it sounds. A middle-aged man in a barber jacket with a camera he doesn't really need anymore, going every Tuesday morning to watch a boy he doesn't know learn how to not move. But that's what I did. For 7 months, that's what I did. And I watched Thomas Ainsworth change. The first thing that changed was small. It was his eyes. In April, his eyes still flickered. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking, but I was looking. When a tourist got too close, his eyes would flick. When a pigeon landed on the railing near his foot, his eyes would flick. When a child laughed too loudly, his eyes would flick. He was alert in the wrong way. He was alert like a frightened animal. By the end of May, the flicker was gone. I don't know how Pell did it. I never saw a lesson. I never saw the moment of teaching. All I ever saw was the boy on parade and the sergeant somewhere in the background, watching, always watching. But somehow between one Tuesday and the next, the flicker went out of those eyes and they became still but not dead. There's a difference. A dead eye looks at nothing. A still eye looks through you, past you, into the middle distance where it has chosen to look. Ainsworth's eyes became still eyes. The second thing that changed was his hands. The tremor in his left hand had been the thing I noticed first that gray Tuesday in March. By June, the tremor was gone. His hands gripped the rifle the way a sleeping man grips a blanket, without thought, without effort. The rifle and the hand had become one object. I photographed that hand many times over those months, and you can see the change in the photographs. In March, the knuckles are white. In June, they're the same color as the rest of him. The third thing that changed was harder to describe. It was his presence, the way the air around him behaved. Have you ever stood near a person who is absolutely calm, not pretending to be calm, actually calm? It changes the room. There's a kind of stillness that comes off them like cool air off a stone. By July, Thomas Ainsworth had that stillness. Tourists who walked past him stopped talking sometimes. I don't think they knew why. They'd be chattering away, phones up, taking selfies, and they'd come level with him and something in them would quiet down. They'd lower their voices. They'd lower their phones. They'd stand for a moment and just look at him, and then they'd walk on, a little slower than before. He was 18 weeks into his posting at that point, and he had become what he was supposed to become. He had become a sentry. In August, I finally spoke to Sergeant Major Pell. It happened by accident. I was packing up my camera at the end of a parade, and I dropped a lens cap and it rolled under the railing and onto the road. And Pell, who happened to be passing on the other side, bent down and picked it up and handed it back to me through the bars. I said thank you. He nodded. He didn't say anything. He started to walk on. And I don't know what came over me, because I'm not the kind of man who talks to strangers. especially not strangers in uniform who look like they could end my life with a glance. But I heard myself say, "That boy, Ainsworth, he's come on a long way." Pell stopped. He turned. He looked at me through the railings. Those gray eyes that I had been watching from a distance for 5 months, and they were on me now, and I felt the temperature drop by about 10 degrees. "You watch my parade, do you?" "I'm a photographer. I come for the changing." He looked at my camera. He looked at my face. He looked at the camera again. I thought he was going to tell me to clear off. He had every right to. Instead he said, very quietly, "Come back Thursday, 10 o'clock, same spot." And then he walked away. I did not sleep well that Wednesday night. Thursday was sunny, I remember that. After all those gray mornings, the sun was out and the gravel of the parade ground was so bright it hurt to look at. I was at my spot at 10 minutes to 10. My hands, I noticed, were a little unsteady. Funny, I thought, I'm catching it. From him, from the boy. At 10 exactly, Pell came out through a side gate and crossed the road. He was not in his ceremonial uniform. He was in a working dress, dark green, no medals, no fuss. He looked, somehow, smaller without the ceremonial kit, more human. He was carrying 2 paper cups of tea. He handed me one through the railing. "Milk, no sugar," he said. "Hope that's all right." I said it was. We stood on opposite sides of the railing and drank tea, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Birds were doing what birds do. A bus went past on Birdcage Walk. Somewhere, a child was crying because she wanted ice cream and her father was saying it was too early. Then Pell spoke. "You've been watching him since March." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about it. I could have lied. I could have said something about the light, the composition, the cultural value of the ceremony, the things photographers say. But there was something about his face that made lies feel pointless. Because the first time I saw him, I thought he was going to break, and he didn't, and I wanted to see how that happened. Pell took a sip of his tea. "He did break," he said. I didn't know what to say to that. He broke twice that first week. Once on the parade ground, which you saw, and once in my office, which you didn't. He sat in the chair across from my desk and he cried for 40 minutes and he asked me to let him go home. He said he wasn't the kind of person who could do this. He said he wasn't brave enough. He said his father had been brave and his father was dead and he was not his father. He paused. He looked across the road at the barracks. His father was a miner. Did you know that? I didn't know anything about him. Coal miner up in Durham, died of black lung when the boy was 12. Long, slow death. The boy nursed him for the last 6 months, spooned soup into his mouth, carried him to the toilet, wiped him clean, 12 years old. I did not say anything. I didn't trust my voice. That boy who came to me in March, said Pell, had already done more brave things than half the men I've trained in 30 years. He just didn't know it. He took another sip of his tea. My job wasn't to make him brave. He was already brave. My job was to convince him of something he had forgotten. I asked very carefully, what had he forgotten? Pell looked at me. The gray eyes were not so cold up close. They were tired. There was a lot of weather in those eyes. That standing still, he said, is the hardest thing in the world, and he had been doing it since he was 12. Pell finished his tea in 3 more sips, slow ones. He was not a man who hurried even with a paper cup. He told me a few more things that morning, leaning against the railing in his working dress, and I listened the way you listen to a doctor explain something you don't fully understand but know you need to remember. I'll try to give it to you the way he gave it to me, in his own order, which was not always the order I would have chosen. He said that Thomas Ainsworth had nearly been sent home in his 2nd week. There had been an incident in the dormitory. One of the other recruits, a bigger lad from Birmingham, had made a joke about Ainsworth's sister, the wheelchair joke. You can imagine the kind. and Ainsworth, who weighed maybe 10 stone soaking wet, had crossed the room and put the Birmingham lad through a wardrobe. Literally. The wardrobe doors came off. The mirror on the inside of one door shattered. There was blood on the floor, and it wasn't Ainsworth's. The Birmingham lad needed 7 stitches in his eyebrow. Ainsworth needed nothing except to be sat down on a bed by a corporal and told to breathe. By rights, said Pell, he should have been out, discharged. That kind of thing you can't have, not in this regiment, not in any regiment. I asked why he wasn't. Because I went and sat with him that night, said Pell, on the bed. He was shaking. Same shake you saw on the parade ground in March, but worse. His hands, his shoulders, his jaw. He was trying not to cry, and he was failing. And I sat on the edge of that bed, and I didn't say anything for about 20 minutes. He paused. Then he said, "Sergeant, I'm sorry." And I said, "What for?" And he said, "For the fighting." And I said, "No, son, not for the fighting. The fighting was right. The fighting was the only honest thing in this whole building tonight. Don't ever apologize for the fighting. Apologize for losing control." Pell looked at me very directly. There's a difference. People don't understand the difference. They think a guardsman doesn't have feelings. He has feelings. He has more feelings than most. He just learns to choose when to use them. I nodded. I wasn't sure I fully understood. I wasn't sure I needed to. And then, said Pell, I asked him about his sister. He looked away when he said this, across the road, at the barracks, at nothing in particular. Her name's Grace. She's 15. Cerebral palsy, like you might have heard. Smart as a whip, he says. Reads books he can't make head nor tail of. Writes him letters every week. Long letters with illustrations, he says. She draws birds in the margins. He paused again. The gray eyes had gone somewhere else. He told me about pushing her chair to school, 4 miles each way, through 3 winters. His mother working double shifts at the Tesco, his father in the ground. And this boy, this 9-stone boy with the shaking hands, pushing his sister's chair 4 miles to school and 4 miles back, every day in the rain, in the snow, in the dark sometimes when the clocks changed. He turned back to me. I said to him, "Son, do you know what you've been doing for the last 7 years?" And he said, "What, Sergeant?" And I said, "You've been standing still while the world tried to break you. That's the only thing this job is. You already know how to do it. You just don't know that you know." Pell crushed the paper cup in his hand. He stopped shaking that night, he said. Not on the parade ground, that took longer, but in his chest, in his stomach, where it matters. He stopped shaking that night. I want to tell you about the day in September, the day that everything led up to. I didn't know it was leading anywhere at the time. None of us did. But looking back, every Tuesday from March to September was a preparation for this one afternoon. It was the 15th of September, a Friday. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I had a wedding to shoot in Surrey at 4 o'clock, and I just popped into central London for a coffee and to pick up a filter I'd had repaired. I came out of the camera shop on Strutton Ground and I thought, sod it, I've got 20 minutes, I'll go and see the boy. He was on the front sentry box, right on Birdcage Walk, the one closest to the railings, the one tourists love because they can get within touching distance. It was warm, unseasonably warm for September. The sky was that high, hard blue that London gets sometimes when summer has decided to come back for one more weekend. There were tourists everywhere, coach parties, a Spanish school group, a family of Americans with the dad in a Liverpool shirt that didn't quite fit him. I leaned on the railing and I watched. Ainsworth was magnificent. I know that sounds like a strange word to use about a 19-year-old standing in a box, but it's the right one. He had become, over those 7 months, something more than a soldier. He had become a piece of the place. The bearskin sat on his head like it had been carved from the same wood as the box he stood in. His rifle was an extension of his arm. His eyes were the eyes Pell had given him in May, the still eyes, the looking through you eyes. A French woman was trying to make him laugh. She had her teenage son with her, and the son was filming on his phone. She was pulling faces, sticking out her tongue, crossing her eyes, doing the things people do to guardsmen because they don't know what else to do with the strangeness of a man who won't move. Ainsworth did not move. He didn't even register her. His eyes were on a fixed point somewhere above the heads of the crowd. His chin was level, his shoulders were down, the rifle was still. The bearskin was still. He was still. The French woman gave up after a minute or two, laughing, and moved on with her son. I lifted my camera. I took a few shots. The light was nice. And then I noticed the man. He was on his own. That was the first thing. Everyone else was in a group, a couple, a family. This man was by himself. He was maybe 40, heavy build, wearing a black jacket too thick for the weather. He had a small backpack on, navy blue, with one strap loose. He was standing about 10 feet from the sentry box, and he was not taking photographs. He was not laughing. He was not pointing things out to a companion. He was just standing. I might not have noticed him if I hadn't been a photographer. Photographers notice people who aren't doing what other people are doing. It's an instinct. You learn to spot the one face in the crowd that isn't part of the crowd. He was watching Ainsworth, but not the way tourists watch guardsmen. Tourists watch with curiosity, amusement, that strange, fond bafflement people get around ceremonial soldiers. This man was watching the way a fox watches a hen house, calculating something, measuring something. I lowered my camera. I told myself I was being daft. I'd been reading too many news stories. The world had everyone jumpy. He was probably just a tired tourist taking a moment. He was probably just lost in his thoughts. He was probably nothing. He took a step towards the sentry box. I'm not joking when I say that something in my chest went cold. A small cold thing, the size of a 50-pence piece, somewhere under my sternum. I have learned over the years to trust that small cold thing. It has been right before. He took another step. He was now maybe 6 feet from Ainsworth. The other tourists hadn't really noticed him. They were busy with their own pictures. The Liverpool shirt dad was now posing his daughter in front of the railing, and the Spanish school group was being herded by a teacher who was checking her watch. The man with the backpack took another step. Now this is the part where I have to be careful, because I want to tell you what happened, but I also want to tell you what I saw, and those aren't always the same thing. I want to tell you what I saw. What I saw was this. Ainsworth's eyes did not move. His head did not move. His body did not move. His rifle did not move. But something changed in him. I can't describe it any better than that. Something changed. The air around him changed. The angle of the light on his face somehow changed, although the sun hadn't moved. He had been still before. Now he was a different kind of still. A waiting kind of still. The kind of still a leopard is in the second before. The man with the backpack took one more step. And then he reached into the bag. It happened very fast and also very slowly. You know how that is. Time stretches and compresses around moments like that. I have replayed it in my head 1,000 times since, and I still can't tell you if it took 2 seconds or 20. I remember the man's hand going into the bag. I remember the strap of the bag swinging loose against his hip. I remember a child's voice somewhere on my left saying, "Mummy, look," and being cut off. I remember Ainsworth's right foot. His right foot moved. That was the first movement. Not the rifle, not the eyes, not the head, the right foot. It came down on the stone of the box with a sound that was somehow louder than it should have been. A single sharp crack of leather on stone, and then his left foot followed, and then he was out of the box and he was moving. He moved differently from anything I had ever seen. Guardsmen, when they march in a particular way. You know how they look. Stiff, formal, ceremonial. This was not that. This was something else. This was a man who had been still for 7 months and had now decided, for one precise reason, to stop being still. And the stillness coming out of him was like a wave. He covered the distance between the box and the man in 3 steps. 3. His rifle came up, not to fire, to bar. He held it across his body, both hands like a fence. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud. I want to make that clear. He did not shout. He did not bellow. The voice that came out of Thomas Ainsworth on that warm September afternoon was the voice of a man who had already decided the outcome of whatever was about to happen. He said, "Sir, step back, hands where I can see them." The man with the backpack froze. His hand was still in the bag. I could not see what was in the bag. I still don't know. I have been told things since, and I'm not sure what's true. Some people have said it was a knife. Some people have said it was nothing, just a phone, just a bottle of water, just the panicked grab of a man who was about to step forward and ask a stupid question. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that Ainsworth held his ground. What I do know is that the man's hand came out of the bag, slowly, empty. What I do know is that within about 8 seconds, 2 other guardsmen and a Metropolitan Police officer were beside Ainsworth, and the man with the backpack was on the pavement, on his knees, hands behind his head, and the crowd had gone completely silent. What I do know is that I had not taken a single photograph. I had stood there with my camera in my hands, and I had watched, and I had not lifted the camera once. Some photographer. I went home that night without going to the wedding. I rang the bride's mother from Vauxhall Bridge, and I told her I'd been taken ill and I was so sorry, and I'd find them a replacement photographer for the same fee out of my own pocket, and she was very kind about it. I think she could hear something in my voice. I'm grateful to her. She didn't ask. I sat on a bench by the river for a long time. I watched the water. I watched the tourists walking along the embankment with their ice creams and their selfie sticks. I thought about Thomas Ainsworth and his sister Grace and the 4 miles to school and the bedroom in Durham where his father had died slowly. I thought about Sergeant Major Pell. I thought about the small, cold thing under my sternum, the thing that had warned me about the man with the backpack, and how Ainsworth must have had the same thing, only bigger and louder and more practiced. How did you teach a boy to listen to that? How did you teach a boy to act on it? How did you take a nervous 19-year-old from a village in Durham and turn him into a man who could stand in a box for 7 months and then, in the space of one breath, become something that the man with the backpack would not forget for the rest of his life? The water went past, boats went past, the sun went down over the Houses of Parliament. I went home. My wife asked me what was wrong, and I told her. I told her all of it. She listened the way she always listens, with her hands around a mug of tea and her feet pulled up under her on the sofa. When I finished, she said, "You should tell the sergeant." I said, "Tell him what?" She said, "Tell him you saw." I didn't go back the next Tuesday, or the Tuesday after that. I'd like to say it was because I was busy. I was busy. I had 3 weddings and a long christening in Hampshire and a corporate shoot for a law firm that ran 2 days over, but that wasn't really why. The truth is, I was a bit frightened of going back. I'm not entirely sure what I was frightened of. Maybe I was frightened that the story I had built up in my head was bigger than the thing that had actually happened. Maybe I was frightened that I would go back and Ainsworth wouldn't be there. Maybe I was frightened that he would be there and I would have nothing to say to him. But mostly, I think, I was frightened of seeing Pell again. Because Pell had seen something in me that morning we drank tea through the railings, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was. I went back in early October. It was a Wednesday, not a Tuesday. I told myself I just happened to be in the area. I had a meeting in Victoria. I had time to kill. None of this was true. I had got up that morning specifically to come and stand at that railing. Ainsworth was not on duty. There was a different lad in the box, taller, older looking, doing the job well but not the way Ainsworth had done it. There was no stillness coming off him. He was just a man in a uniform doing a job. I stood at the railing for half an hour, foolishly hoping Ainsworth would somehow appear, and he didn't. Of course he didn't. They rotate. I knew that. Anyone who'd watched the guard for more than a week knew that. I was about to leave when Pell came out of the side gate. He saw me. He nodded. He crossed the road. He was in working dress again, no tea this time, and he leaned on the railing the way he had in August, and he looked at me with those gray, weather-filled eyes. "You were there," he said. It wasn't a question. "On the 15th. I know you were. There's footage. 3 different tourist phones. You're in the corner of 2 of them holding your camera, not taking pictures." I didn't say anything. "You all right?" I think I made some kind of small sound that I meant to be a yes. I don't think it came out as a yes. He nodded slowly. He didn't push. After a long moment, he said, "He asked about you, Ainsworth." I looked up. He asked if the photographer with the brown jacket was all right. He'd seen you. He sees everyone. That's the job. He doesn't move, but he sees everyone. He was looking at the man in the backpack. He was looking at all of you, the whole crowd. The man in the backpack was the one he settled on in the end, but he was looking at all of you. He saw a French woman pulling faces. He saw a teenage boy filming on a phone. He saw an American in a Liverpool shirt. He saw a man with a brown jacket and a camera who lowered the camera at a particular moment for no obvious reason. He paused. "You lowered the camera before he moved. Did you know that?" I shook my head. I had not known that. I had thought I lowered it at the same time as everything else. "You saw it before he did, or at the same time he noticed," he told me. I felt the cold thing under my sternum again, the 50-pence piece thing, only it was warmer this time, not a warning, a recognition. "Is he all right?" I asked. "Ainsworth." "He's grand. He's been moved to another posting for a bit. Routine. Nothing to do with what happened. Then he'll be back." "And the man with the backpack?" Pell looked at me for a long moment. He weighed something up. He decided. "Disturbed gentleman, off his medication, from Croydon. He wasn't going to hurt anyone. He had a wallet in the bag and a packet of polos and a folded letter he was trying to deliver to the king, about something that had happened to his brother in 1997. Oh, said Pell. We stood at the railing for a bit. The wind moved the leaves on the trees in St. James's Park. "Does it make a difference?" he said, knowing that. I thought about it. "I don't know." "I'll tell you what I think," said Pell. "I think it makes no difference at all. I'll tell you why." He turned slightly, so he was facing me more fully. Ainsworth didn't know what was in the bag. He couldn't have known. He saw a man behaving in a way that didn't fit. He gave the man one chance to do the right thing. The man's hand came out of the bag empty. End of story. If the hand had come out of the bag holding something else, my boy was ready. That's the job. That's the only job. He looked down at his hands on the railing. Standing still is not the same as doing nothing. People think it's the same. It's not the same. Standing still is having all of yourself, every muscle, every nerve, every thought gathered and ready and pointing in the same direction and choosing not to move until the moment moves you. Most people will go their whole lives without ever standing that still. Most people are moving all the time, twitching, fidgeting, reacting to nothing. My boy learned to stop reacting to nothing, so that when there was something to react to, he had something left to react with. He looked at me. That's all I taught him. That's the whole secret. Stop reacting to nothing. Save yourself for something. I asked him then, the question I had been wanting to ask since March. That first day, when he was shaking, when you said you don't have to be brave yet, you just have to stand. Where did that come from? Pell smiled for the first time. A small smile, tired around the edges, not quite reaching the gray eyes but close. My grandfather said it to me. Your grandfather was a guardsman. My grandfather was a porter at Newcastle Central Station for 43 years. Never wore a uniform in his life unless you count the cap they gave him. But he stood in the same spot on platform 2 for 43 years, watching trains come and go, and he was the kindest man I have ever known. Saw more grief on that platform than most chaplains see in a lifetime. Soldiers going off. Soldiers coming back. Some of them coming back wrong. Wives meeting husbands who weren't quite their husbands anymore. He stood there and he watched and he carried bags, and he said nothing unless he was asked to. He paused. He said it to me when my dad died. I was 11. He sat me down in the parlor and he said, "Daniel, you don't have to be brave yet, you just have to stand." I didn't know what he meant. I do now. He looked across the road. Every man I've trained for the last 30 years has stood, in some way, on my grandfather's platform. Some of them needed louder lessons than others. Ainsworth didn't need a loud lesson. He needed somebody to look at him and see the standing he had already done. The wind moved the leaves again. "That's all any of us need, really," he said. "Someone to look at us and see the standing we've already done." I want to finish this with something small. Not big, not dramatic. The big and the dramatic I've already given you. In December, just before Christmas, I went back to the railings one last time. I was due to leave London for a fortnight to visit my wife's family in Norfolk, and I wanted to see the boy in his bearskin one more time before I went. He was on duty, the front box again, the same one as that day in September. It was cold, properly cold. The sky was that low white sky that means snow is thinking about it but hasn't quite decided yet. There were fewer tourists. The ones who were there were bundled up in scarves, and steam came out of their mouths when they laughed. I stood at the railing. I didn't lift my camera. I just stood. Ainsworth was a statue. His eyes were the still eyes. His hands were the still hands. The bearskin sat on his head like a black sun. He was 19 years old, very nearly 20, and he was the most peaceful-looking human being I had ever seen. After about 10 minutes, a little girl came up to the railing next to me. She had a red bobble hat and mittens on a string through her coat sleeves. She must have been about 6. She stood next to me and looked at Ainsworth for a long time, and I watched her face, and she had the kind of look on her face that I imagine I had on mine when I first walked into a cathedral as a child. Hushed, a bit confused, reverent without knowing what reverence is. She said very quietly, "Is he real?" I said, "He's very real." She said, "Why doesn't he move?" And I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the boy in March with the trembling hand. I thought about the wardrobe in Birmingham and the 7 stitches. I thought about Grace in the wheelchair and the 4 miles to school and the father who died slowly in a back bedroom. I thought about a porter on platform 2 at Newcastle Central. I thought about a sergeant with gray eyes saying, "You don't have to be brave yet, you just have to stand." And I said to her, because he's already moved enough for one lifetime. Now he's letting the rest of us catch up. She looked at me. She did not understand. Why would she? She was 6. She turned back to Ainsworth and she stood next to me at the railing for another 5 minutes, and her breath came out in little clouds, and she did not say another word. When her mother called her to come on, she went, but she looked back over her shoulder twice, once at 20 feet, once at 50. I stood at the railing a bit longer. Snow began to fall. Very fine snow. The kind you can hardly see until it lands on something dark. It landed on the black fur of the bearskin and didn't melt. It landed on the red tunic and didn't melt. It landed on my brown jacket and melted at once. And Thomas Ainsworth, who had been a frightened boy in a coal village and a frightened boy on a parade ground and a brother and a son and a guardsman, and now, somehow, all of these things at once, stood in the snow on a December afternoon in London and did not move. And I understood, finally, what Sergeant Major Pell had been trying to tell me all year. Some people walk through life. Some people run. Some people are pushed. But every now and again, you meet someone who has learned how to stand. And when you do, you should stop. You should put down your camera. You should put down whatever you happen to be carrying. And you should stand with them for a while.